folks, welcome to my talk about Flipper, the Extensible DevTool platform for, among others, React Native. My name is Michel Weststrate and I'm working at Facebook on Flipper. And so at Facebook, we discovered that React Native is quite an awesome development stack for mobile development. Why? Basically because it provides this very fast feedback loop. And basically it optimizes the time you have between making a change in the code and seeing it on screen. So that's pretty cool, and that's pretty important to get a good development speed. But there's another question we have to ask, and it's like, how fast can you figure out which change you have to make? And so that is basically where Flipper comes in. Flipper is a mobile app development platform developed at Facebook, and it's used by basically all of our mobile engineers. And so earlier this year, we introduced support for React Native. And so I'm going to give you a quick show how that's going to look like. So first of all, we're going to download Flipper from our website. Now I skipped this part because I already pre-installed it. And when you start Flipper, you see that there's a pretty empty canvas. So for this demo, I prepared a small application, and in this application, we're going to show some Bitcoin data. So here we have the code. It's a freshly generated React Native project. And the only change I'm going to make is to enable Hermes. And so with that, I'm going to start the emulator, and I'm going to start my project. So that takes a little while, but we're done. It's loading now, and here we have a fresh React Native project. And immediately we see that Flipper has a lot of contents. So on the left, there's two sections we can recognize. The first section is our application, so the coins application in this case, and it shows all the plugins that are connected to this application. And so we also see plugins connected to the device itself. For example, the logs. And secondly, we have this connection to the Metro bundler itself. So it allows us, for example, to inspect the logs, but also to inspect the React development tree. So with Flipper, we can directly use the React Devtools and inspect the layout. But what's even cooler is because Flipper is a tool that was developed for native mobile development, it means that we can also inspect the native elements that are used by React Native to create our layout. So if we use the layout inspector, we can inspect a certain element and we can even make changes to it. So for example, if I change the text over here, you will immediately see that that applies to what's happening on the screen. So now we're actually adding the native elements used by React Native. And there's a bunch of more plugins available out of the box, like the image cache inspection, seeing the preferences and modifying them. And a very powerful plugin is the network plugin. So this basically allows you to inspect all the network requests that are being made by your application. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. But so this is basically what you get out of the box if you start Flipper on a fresh React Native project. Now, as said, what I want to build today for this demo is a small application that shows Bitcoin data, like in this mockup. And so I'm going to take a little shortcut and paste some files I already have on my clipboard. And this basically replaces the app.js with some UI and some logic that fetches Bitcoin data from a remote endpoint. And so we show some Bitcoin data, but it's a bit incomplete. So we have this coin view component. It fetches the data in a user effect, and then it uses a flat list to map over all the data and show it. Next, there's this coin item component, and that renders an initial record. So for example, if I have a coin, I can inspect what's in there. So we have rank and icon, but what else is there? One way to figure it out is using console.log. So I print the data I receive. And let's take a look at the Metro bundler. So what I see now is that it's printing all the data. But I can take a look at that same data from Flipper, which is a lot richer. So this is basically the same log. But by viewing this in Flipper, we have a bit more capabilities. So I can filter on log level, I can copy details, I can search. So this is a bit more powerful. And actually, we don't even need that console.log because we could just have looked directly at network requests that are being sent. So for example, I can inspect one of those network requests. And since this is a JSON response, I get this nice interactive tree that shows me all the data available in the request body. So this is an even easier way to figure out what is going on and which data is arriving in my application. Even more powerful is attaching the Hermes debugger. So that's why I enabled the Hermes debugger at the start. So what I can do when using the debugger is find that coin item component, set a breakpoint, and then the next time we have a rendering, it will hit a breakpoint, and we can inspect the object. So now this is a much more general solution and doesn't rely on network requests to be able to see what's happening in our application. So basically, we found different ways of inspecting our application, which are all really hard when you don't have Flipper available. So there's a lot of built-in power to Flipper, but that's actually not all of it. Flipper is an extensible platform. And if, for example, you open an application when working at Facebook, there's probably like 50 plugins you have that allows you to inspect several feature services in the application. And so for us, extensibility is very important. And basically, there are two types of plugins you can develop. They're technically the same, but they're conceptually very different. So first of all, there are the generic plugins. These were the plugins we saw so far, which generically apply to a stack, to a tech stack. So for example, inspecting network requests, layout. But you can also build application-specific plugins. So plugins that have knowledge about the meaning of your application and enrich your development experience in that way. And I'm going to build a small example of that. So when it comes to developing a Flipper plugin, there's two parts that need to be implemented. So first of all, there is some JavaScript that needs to be added to the Flipper desktop, just to make sure that you have like a nice UI in which you can share the data. Secondly, you have to extend the mobile application to enrich your application and, for example, send events to the Flipper desktop. So what I want to do in the next demo is to basically aggregate the Bitcoin data we have and aggregate it over time to be able to see trends. So that is something that would be very hard by just looking at the logs or the network requests that are passing by. So when we look at logs, we see a lot of data, but we can't really tell what the courses of those coins are doing. So let's build a plugin for that. So first we remove the console.log we introduced earlier. And next we're going to scaffold a new plugin using Flipper package. So we open fresh terminal, get a fresh directory, and we scaffold the whole thing using Flipper package. And so we give it the ID coins. That's pretty important because that's what aligns the desktop and the mobile side of things. We wait for the installation. And let's take a look at what has been generated for us. So when we start, there is basically a reducer generated that takes the events and by default just stores them. And there's a really simple UI that basically dumps all the data to the screen which we have so far. So let's restart Flipper. That should load our plugin. And so if we go to the plugin management screen, we see now that our coins plugin has been loaded. But so far we only have the desktop side of things. So let's head back to our mobile application and implement our plugin. So for now, I'm just going to do this in this file directly. So I create this coins plugin, which first has to expose its ID, remember, to connect to the desktop side of things. And secondly, it has to handle a few events. So for example, it will receive an onConnect event with a connection whenever the user selects this plugin in the UI. And that means that a connection is open to the Flipper desktop and we can start sending messages. So for that, I introduce a sendCoins method, and given the connection, it sends some data over the wire to the desktop. Now I want to load the plugin only if I'm having a development build. So in production builds, I want Code to be tree shaken away. So that's why I make it conditional. And now I have to install the Flipper bindings for React Native as well. I need to do that only once. So that's happening in the background. And now whenever we receive new data and we're in a development build, I'm going to send the data to the Flipper desktop. So this should basically be everything we need to wire the mobile application to our new plugin. Now I'm going to restart my Android application just one time because we just installed some native dependencies in form of the Flipper bindings. And also I'm going to start Flipper packets in watch mode to make sure our desktop plugin gets recompiled every time I make some changes in there. So let's wait for the app to be loaded. There we go. It has some data. And now our plugin is also visible in the Flipper UI. So I've enabled the plugin, and now we see the data coming through and being dumped on the screen. So this kind of proves that the wiring works. Now, the UI so far is a little bit ugly. So again, I prepared something on my clipboard to make this nice. The changes are picked up. And so if we refresh the data, what we see now is that the data is ordered per coin, and we aggregate the data as well, so that if a second request comes in, we can show the trend between the current and previous state. So this is very specific for our application. So basically, we did now a one-way integration where we generate data on the mobile application and display it in Flipper. We can also do it the other way around. We can basically use Flipper as a remote control for our mobile application. And that is pretty convenient because, especially when doing mobile development, there's usually not a lot of place on your screen to introduce debug utilities. So in the next demo, what I want to make sure is that rather than refreshing the data all the time in the background, which can be pretty annoying when you're debugging, I want to be able to pause this process. So that as a developer, I'm not looking at something and in the meantime, new data is coming in. So let's start by introducing in our desktop plugin a new button, a simple pause button. And if I click it, I'm going to send an event called pause to the client. So that's the mobile application. So that's pretty straightforward. The button shows up nicely. And now, of course, we have to process the data on the other side. And so that's where that connection objects comes in handy as well. So on the connection, I can start receiving new events. So I use the method connection.receive, and I'm going to for this pause event that might have some params, not in this case, and it also has a responder which we can send data with. Nothing in this case, but on this event we call the pause method, and in the pause method we're going to call a setPause method if you have such a thing, and toggle the current state. Now, setPause, that is basically a use state updater function, so that which we pass to the plugin. Again, if we're in a project in a development build. So the last thing we have to do is to make sure that our effect now depends on the current is paused state. And if the current state is paused, then we can return early from the effect rather than fetching data. Let's wait for the refresh again. There we go. It's taking a few seconds now to load the data from the endpoints, but there it is. And so now I can press the pause button and it will stop fetching new network requests. Now this is a little hard to see now, so let's visualize it just for this demo. So we're in the pause state. We save it, we wait for the refresh. Let's wait until the endpoint responds. There it is, some data. And now if I click the button, you see immediately that the state in the application changes. So basically we have now built a remote control from inside Flipper to interact with our mobile application and alter its behavior. So that is how you can build application-specific plugins. But since it's also possible to build generic plugins, there are quite some community plugins available. And there are two I want to highlight shortly. The first one is the React Devtools plugin. So what this does is, if you're not familiar with the React Devtools, they give debug utilities for React Native for applications that use specific stacks, for example, Redux or Mobic State Tree. And so with the React Devtools plugin, the React Devtools stack can be integrated and used directly from Flipper, which is great because then you have all your debug utilities in one place. Another one, which is pretty cool, is the Redux debugger. Again, this is a community plugin, and I'm going to quickly show you how to use it. I already installed it, but for installation instructions, check their website. But just for this demo, I'm going to create a Redux store, the most simple reducer possible, which takes an action and simply makes its payload the next state. Again, this is just to show the wiring. And so if I create a Redux store, and this is a development build, I'm going to load that plugin and use it as middleware to Redux. So that creates the store. Now, whenever I receive some new data, I'm going to dispatch the new data I receive. And now if I head back to Flipper, there it is. So I can enable this debugger now. And as soon as some new data arrives, we see all the events coming in. And actually, it even shows us the diff with the previous actions. Or we can look at the state as a holistic whole. Now, the nice thing about this plugin is that it's like really low code. It's like maybe 200 lines of code. The reason is that like all the components you see over here, like this tree, the div thing, the table of the overview, those are all Flipper components which are ready to use if you're building a plugin. So Flipper is a pretty extensible platform. And our roadmap is looking pretty great as well if you intend to build plugins. Why? Because we're refreshing the design and the component library. And also we're going to improve the extensibility to make it even easier to build a plugin than it is now. So Flipper is open source. Feel free to contribute either by writing fresh plugins or by improving Flipper itself. So that is basically what I wanted to share with you. I think Flipper is a pretty awesome development platform for React Native, providing a lot of powerful tools to analyze your applications. So thanks for listening. And if you have any questions, just remain for the Q&A. Thanks.